We forget to enjoy our animals. We forget to come in and spend time with them and watch them move around. Instead, it becomes this, run into the room, feed, clean, water, and then leave. And for whatever reason, it's almost like we have to build a habit of going back into the room and engaging with the animals and just watching them behave, and giving yourself a reason to do that through running some sort of simple study or simple experiment is a perfect way to do that. Yeah,
exactly. A leopard gecko is a very common starter pet here in the UK, at least it is. So definitely, when you get to I'm guilty of it. When you get to 10 or 9 pets like I've got, you do forget about, the not simple, but, the plainer looking ones out of the group that you've got. They look absolutely amazing. So yeah, they really do make their own exhibit. I would say that if I want to try and up it a bit more, I really want to put the spotted sun beetles, which are the yellow and black ones, I want to put them in an actual reptile enclosure because they will look amazing in there.
Welcome to episode number 105 of the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin. Thank you so much for tuning in today. So today we have a returning guest on the podcast. That is Olly Wilson, who is a zookeeper out of the UK. So in this episode, we do cover quite a broad spectrum of topics, including a few of the interesting species that Olly works with at home, and also the experience he has working at the zoo, working with Hoofstock animals. If you remember last year he was on the podcast, he was working with reptiles. He's at a new zoo now where he gets to work with large mammals, which is a really fascinating part of this conversation. And there are two main topics that I think that are really worth highlighting in this intro that we also discuss. The first is this concept of doing experiments at home with your animals. Now, of course, let me put a caveat in real quick. Safe experiments is important, but Olly walks us through this experiment that he did, or this, at-home study that he did with his leopard gecko, where he made a dedicated arid side in the enclosure and a dedicated humid side, and he spent 6 to 8 weeks watching its behavior, watching where it spent most of its time, figuring out what preference the animal had and how that correlated with the time of the day and the temperature and whatnot. And although it's quite a simple experiment, I think it really highlights the importance of engaging with your animals. As I say in the episode, I think too often we get into the mode of we almost forget to enjoy our animals. We just go into the feeding and watering mode and just basic cleaning, and you come in your reptile room, do the maintenance, and then leave, and you forget to enjoy your animals. And I think doing little at-home studies and experiments, just like Olly lays out in this episode, is a perfect way to re-engage your interest with the animal. So we have a great discussion about that, and I hope it sparks some of you guys to do some of your own at-home studies, whether that's studying different types of light, maybe different perches or different substrates. There's so many different little preferential studies you could do with your animals that I think would allow many of us to re-engage with your animals if you're going through one of those patches where your animals are seeming like they're more work than fun. And another topic that really left me thinking after this episode was Olly talks about his fruit beetle collection. He's got a couple different colonies of fruit beetles, and we discuss raising them and using the grubs as feeders and whatnot. But it really dawned on me that you could turn your feeder insects into a display enclosure in your reptile room, which I think would really change the game away from that real creepy, stinky tub of crickets in your basement to something that actually people can enjoy. Now, whether or not you could do that with crickets is another story, but Olly walks us through this with fruit beetles, and it made my mind think, and we'll see if you guys kind of think about the same thing. Maybe there are species of insects that we can turn into display animals or display enclosures that would make our reptile rooms look even more interesting, and it's just something better than having the Rubbermaid tub in the basement. I don't know, that could be just my mind going crazy, but you'll have to let me know what you think about that concept as well. I've definitely started to look into fruit beetles after having this conversation with Olly. Anyway, before we jump into the episode, as always, make sure you head to animalsathome.network.com if you're looking for the show notes for this episode or any other episode that has been recorded. If you'd like to buy yourself an Animals at Home t-shirt, which for some reason I'm not wearing right now, I forgot to put one on before I started recording this intro, but if you are, head to animalsathome.ca/shop, and there you can find sweaters and t-shirts. $5 does automatically get donated for every shirt sold to the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy. If you are looking to join our Patreon, head to patreon.com/animalsathome. There you'll have early access to podcast episodes, as well as the opportunity to join us on Zoom chats, usually once every 4 to 5 weeks. And also you'll have the opportunity to submit questions to upcoming guests. And finally, thank you so much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. You can find affiliate links in both the YouTube description and the show notes. Again, if you click on those links and make a purchase, a small commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And of course, that helps me support the show. Let's jump into the episode. Enjoy. Ollie, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's always good to talk reptiles, so can't go wrong.
I think it's almost been about a year, maybe even a little bit more than a year since. Do you remember what month we released the last episode from last year?
Oh, I want to say summer, so maybe March, but I think a year. I think a year sounds right to me.
Okay,
yeah, maybe a bit longer.
Yeah, it's been about a year. So maybe you could just quickly run through your current group of animals that you have, and then we're going to get into a little bit more detail afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, I've mostly got lizards and amphibians. So I've only got the one snake still, which was my African house snake. Unfortunately, that's just due to room. I do not have the room for any more pets at the moment. So that's just due to restrictions. But I've got gold dust day gecko still. I've got my horned frog. I got my bearded dragon, my crested gecko. I've also got my green forest mountain dragon. So he's the newest addition. And he was quite hard to come by. So he's kind of my jewel of my collection at the moment. And then obviously the Dune gecko as well. So he's also quite a rarity. And then my leopard geckos, unfortunately, my female passed away about 2-3 months ago now. So I've just got the male, but he's doing really well. And then I've now also latest edition, which isn't reptilian at all, is my fruit beetle colonies. So that's more inverts, but they're still really cool. Hence why I got them. And I've still got my tortoise as well. So we're up to about 10 different animals at the moment, so getting pretty full.
Yeah, you've capped out on the space.
Definitely. I need to move.
Well, and I wonder what you think of this, because since you are in the zoo world, I know the zoo side of things, they use very professional language and everything. And I start seeing people wanting to move away from the term collection, and I'm starting to do it myself, although I still use the word saying collection for the group of animals. It's hard not to, because it's the word works so well. One of my friends, Liam from Reptiles and Research, mentioned that group would be a better word. And then also, actually, one of my patrons suggested the word selection rather than collection, saying it's a selection of animals. I was wondering how you feel about the semantics of things. Do you think those, like, does selection work well? Or in the zoo world, is there a word that you guys use to talk about a group of animals without making it seem like trading cards?
Yeah, it's a hard one, and it varies from collection to collection and zoo to zoo. I mean, I personally like collection because it literally means a group of animals. Problem in the zoo world, if you start saying group, is there's so many different terms for just the word group. Like, for example, a group of rhinos is called a crash of rhinos. A group of giraffes is called a tower of giraffes. So there's already lots of names that the professionals use. So it's quite hard to then just use group, because then you're going to have, well, actually it's tower, or it's lemurs, for example, is a conspiracy of lemurs. So
I didn't know any of those.
Yeah. So like there's all these actual official terms that not many people know. So the problem with group is I feel like it would just confuse it a little bit. I mean, I think it's great in terms of, rather than collection, I think group's good, or selection as well, I think it's very good. But I don't think it covers it enough. And also, obviously, reptiles is a group in itself. So is mammals, so is birds. Mm-hmm. So I just don't think it covers it enough. I think the good thing about collection is, straight away, even if you're not an animal person, it means more than one. And it means, it does mean a group. It means a group of things. So I think until we can better define it, collection actually is probably still the better term. When you start looking into, as I mentioned, all those other terms that you may not have heard of, like conspiracy and tower and crash and so on.
Yeah, it is tricky because, and that was sort of my position as well, that the word collection, I mean, it doesn't have to mean an inanimate object, where I think, from people from outside of the reptile hobby, they might think of it that way. But really, when you look at the definition, that's not what it means. So in the zoo world, do you guys use that word quite often?
Yeah, so if, for example, if I said I went to visit another zoo and I had to look around, I'd say, I went to this zoo and I looked at their collection, because obviously it's a collection of animals, but then if I wanted to elaborate more, that's when I'd say, you know, I had to look at their reptiles or their birds. So collections used widely. It's also used as a title. So, you know, if you're managing the zoo's collection, you would be collection manager. So it's already ingrained in that culture. So at least I think for zoos, it'd be hard to get it out of it and replace it with something else. But in terms of the reptile hobby, you know, yeah, there's potential for it to be switched to something else. Mm-hmm. But I struggle to find a word that covers it as well as collection. And as you say, collection doesn't have to mean a bad thing. It just means, you know, more than one. It's not you know, it's your point of view as to if it's bad or not.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think we need to think on it a bit more. But I think the suggestions so far, like selection and group, are good. But I think, as I pointed out, there are a few issues with those that, you know, if you are a bit more on your terms and your terminology, you would then see it be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see how actually it's harder than that. Wouldn't be as simple as that, you know?
Yeah. Okay, well, that's good, because this is a conversation that I've been slowly having over time with different people, and that's some great points to add to it, so people can start thinking about that, of how they want the language to define what they're doing and whether or not they want to change things. So I think that will give everybody something to think about, because those are some great points that haven't been brought up before. So let's chat a little bit about your collection. I know first I would love to start with your leopard gecko. As you said, you had one of your leopard geckos pass away, but you still have one that you've had. I think you've had him. This is the one that you've had for a long time, right?
Yeah. So he's a boy. He's called Nero, and I've had him. He'll be 15 this year. Mm-hmm. So I've had him. He was 1 when I got him, so I've had him 14 years essentially, and he's not slowing down. He's the same, you know, gecko he was when he was 1 year old. But unfortunately, I lost the female. So I had a pair. I rescued the female, as I mentioned before. She's the one that was under the wardrobe for months. And the owner thought she died, got rid of the tank, moved house, and then pulled out the furniture. And there she was, you know, very skinny and very emaciated, but alive. So I just happened to be in the pet shop at the time when they brought him in. And I just said, yeah, I'll take her because I had the room. And I try to rescue as many animals as I can. All of the guys that I've got are from other people that couldn't look after him anymore. The only shop bought pet I have is Nero, who, you know, is years old now. Mm-hmm. So it's just the male now, but I had a breeding pair and they did have eggs. Unfortunately, none hatched, but, you know, they would still punt them out, and I'd let them do it because I didn't want her to get egg bound. And I thought, at least if she's doing, even if they're duds, I can remove them and it's just less stress for her, which worked out pretty well. She was probably about 13 when she died. Again, I'm not 100% sure because she's a rescue. Yeah. So I put it down to 13, judging by her behavior and her body mass, but there's no 100% way to know for sure. But she wasn't young. She definitely wasn't young. So.
Yeah, I'm sure she had some organ damage as well from being emaciated for so long and dehydrated. So it makes sense that she didn't quite get to her full lifespan. As far as your Nero goes, the leopard gecko, I know you did sort of an interesting experiment with him, and you were sort of testing a few different methods of care or different substrates and different humidity ranges. So can you sort of lay that out, what you did and why you decided to do that?
Yeah, so essentially, obviously, so the female died and she died overnight. So I came in the morning to feed and clean. And unfortunately, I found her in a little cave, passed away. So straight away, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to, you know, take all this out and disinfect everything because obviously her secretions and toxins that had been coming out of the body had leaked into the substrate. So I knew I had to do that anyway. And I thought, well, you know, it's a full substrate clean. I'm not just going to keep it how it was because, as we discussed before, you want to push and you want to make sure that you keep upgrading your care. But what really got to me was I looked back into, you know, some of the old care sheets that I had, some of the online research, because I was looking for inspiration anyway as to how to redo the setup. And what got to me was, you know, in pretty much every literature I read, there's this ongoing argument between humidity versus dry, and if, you know, leopard geckos should be on either or. So I had to look at their home range, and obviously in the wild, they come from the Middle East. So they come from India, they come from Afghanistan, they come from Iraq. And when you look at their habitat, it's not just semi-arid desert, it's also forest edges. India especially has some good forest there. So I thought, okay, you know, they're showing, you know, signs of a bit of both. And all we're doing is one or the other. You know, there's arid, sandy setups that people say, oh, they get impaction. And then, you know, people go the other way and they go completely soil. And then you get, again, people say, oh, they're going to get impaction, or, oh, it's too humid, it needs to be drier. So I thought, okay, you know, all this research, as great as it is, it's not helping me because it's the same argument again and again. So I thought, well, why don't I actually do an experiment and actually try doing half and half? And I thought I'll leave it in there for a week or two. If he's showing signs of stress, or for whatever reason I think like, he's not doing well, I'll take it out and I'll just put what I originally had in there, which was Leo Life, which is that specially made substrate, and then excavator clay. So I had that in there originally. So I thought I'll just switch it back to that because, he's doing fine on that. And we'll just see how it goes. So that was my main inspiration for doing it, was because, this conflicting argument keeps coming up again and again. And I just thought, well, it'd be nice to actually see what the animal shows me as opposed to what, everybody online says, really.
Yeah, there's that microclimate debate that always goes on. People use the sort of the gross temperature range from a certain area, and then we have these super dry areas, and it doesn't work out, or it's not a representation of what they have in the wild. So can you lay out what you did to the enclosure to actually split it so it was half more humid and half sort of more of an arid setup?
Yeah, so essentially his hot side, which is the heat mat side, so the bit where the heat gradient would be, I made that the humid side because I thought the heat's going to help make the humidity, the air rise and the humidity go up. So that's koi fiber or brick, whatever, you want to call it, because different country calls it everything different, but it's essentially coconut husk kind of thing. So I had that on one half, which was the hot side. And then on that side, I also planted a golden pothos. So there is a living live plant in there. I already had lots of hides and lots of fake plants, so I dotted them about as well, but changed the position. He's also got a water bowl because for some reason he only drinks out of that. He won't drink out of spray when I spray it. So I put that in there as well. And then I literally just got a ruler and I just kind of edged the side of the substrate with the ruler and then put the arid side on the cold side and then repeated the process. So lots of hides, lots of logs, no plants in that side because I wanted that to be as dry as it could be because obviously I wanted to see the difference in his behavior to each. So the heat map went over to the arid side a little bit because I placed it in the center, but it was mainly cool that side. So the hot side was the tropical side, the cool side was the arid side, which again, being nocturnal species, I thought that actually works quite well because obviously overnight the temperature is going to drop anyway, and that might be more naturalistic. He's also got a UV light in there, an Arcadia 12%, I think it's T8, T5 bulb in there. So that also replicates, and that's on a timer. So that turns off every 12 hours or so to replicate that. So I literally had a line down the middle. Obviously, as time went on, it did merge a little bit, but not really, just where he walks from side to side. So it's still a very much defined area. And then essentially I just watched him and waited to see, what behaviors he showed and what sides he showed preference to.
And what did you notice when you put him in there?
So straight away he was exploring. So I put him in the middle to see what side he'd go to once he's free again. And he went straight to the humid side, which really surprised me. And he literally just explored. So he looked at the plant. He had a little, sniff and a lick as they do. He went to all the hides, went in and out of them, walked around. Then he went to the arid side and did the same thing, just checked everything out. And then he settled down in the hide on the humid side. And that was about 7:00 in the evening, my time, so UK time. And he stayed in there overnight. And then after that initial phase was when I started seeing all of the exploration and the new behaviors coming out. So that first night he had a little look and then he had a little rest, basically.
And then as far as where he spent most of his time, I think, how was it? Did you have it set up for like 6 weeks or 2 months now, probably almost at this point?
So yeah, at this point, like 2 months. But when I started seeing, like when I sat down and thought, right, okay, I've got enough weeks of data here to say, okay, I've seen a difference. That was 6 weeks. So that was about midway. And what I saw essentially was he's spending most of his daytime. So when he's asleep on the humid side, and he's in any number one of those hides. The humidity on that side is about 45 to 50%. And obviously you don't want to go above 70 for leopard geckos. So I was quite happy with that. The plant was keeping that quite high. So that was really good. And then I would mist it about once a week. So I'd just do a quick spray on everything and then I'd let it dry out. The room temp's about 20. So that was really good. And then his hot side is about 21 to 28 when it gets going, then it turns up down. So he spent most of his time there in the day, and then of a night he would come out and he'd go to the arid side, and he's got a latrine there, so that's where he would go to this toilet and do his business. But then he'd spend a lot of time exploring on that side. He would also just have a little bit of a bask. He'd just sit there for a bit. Even though there's not heat that side, he would still sit out in the open and have a little nap. So that was pretty cool to see. And then he'd come back, and early hours in the morning when the sun's coming up and his lights come on, he would go back to the humid side, and he would go into one of the hides and sleep, and then obviously repeat again. But it was really interesting because I would have thought he would go to the arid side to sleep, but he's showing preference for the humid side way more than the arid side. If in terms of hours in the day, he's probably spending about 5 to 6 on the humid side and then 3 on the arid side. Overnight, obviously I'm not watching him the whole time, but he's always on that side. If I come in the middle of the night to change something, he's that side. So I can say with some certainty that day he's humid side, night he's arid side, and then dawn and dusk he's a mixture of the two because he's exploring these, having a look around.
Well, it is really interesting. I mean, sort of as I alluded to earlier, especially on the arid side, people will make a desert setup and it'll be bone dry and there's no areas of humidity or moisture in the enclosure. And really, in reality, most of these animals, especially during the day, it sort of makes sense that they would go burrow, find some moisture, and they're going to be in a cool area that has, maybe if they're burrowing or going into some leaf litter or even, like you said, at the forest edge, there's going to be places in their environment where there is high humidity. And I think really the only way to test it is do what you've done and give them the choice and see where they go.
Yeah, I mean, like, I completely agree. I mean, I was trying to figure out, why I was seeing these behaviors. And I think the point you've just made about, it being cooler in the burrows overnight was why he was going to the hides in the day on the more humid side, because it was way cooler on that side, yes, but obviously it still had the heat mat, so the heat was still there, but the humidity was just so much more than the arid side. And he was fast asleep when I would lift up the hide to check that he's not just awake in there, stressed out or anything. He was fast asleep, and it was really good to see, because I would have thought that's why he's doing it. It's because it's simulating that temperature drop overnight. When he had the excavator clay in there, he would go in those burrows and he would hide in there, but nowhere near as much as he is now. And he wasn't exploring as much as he is now. So he's definitely, more active in himself than he was on the old substrate, which has been another really cool, bit of behavior to see coming out of him.
Yeah. So I think it's just going to become a norm as we evolve our reptile care over time to make sure that our arid species do have areas of moisture that they can, hide in. Has there been any difference in shedding, or has he always been a pretty good shedder?
That's the most interesting and I'd say obvious aspect that I've seen. So he's had issues with his shedding since I've had him, because, and this is probably true for most novice keepers when they started out. When I bought him, the care sheet was explicitly saying, you've got to have him on sand. He can't be on anything else. So it was too dry. And he had his water bowl, but obviously that's not the same as a humid enclosure. So he had the typical, shedding on the toes, getting stuck. So I would often have to give him a little bath and get some cotton wool and gently dab it off. And I did that for a number of years until obviously I got better at just reptiles in general and did more of my own research. And, the old enclosure he was on with the excavator clay and the Leo Life, he didn't have as many issues, but he still had, some, because now I know it was still too dry. So since being on this stuff, it's disappeared. I mean, and I'm talking overnight. He had still had bits of skin on his toes, and the next day that I checked on him, it was coming off. So it was an immediate, change, which was really, that I didn't expect to see that. I thought that would take a couple of days. And since then he's had, I think, 2 sheds, and he's not had the toe issues at all. He's just shed it completely off, and it's not been a problem. So that's really been a dramatic change. But it's nice in a way, because it confirms to me that I've done the right thing and that the humidity isn't too high. It's the right, temp and reading. So yeah, that blew me away by far, because that's, one of the problems I see all the time with Leos and with people coming to me and saying, oh, is there any advice for, for getting this off their toes? It's common, even now with all the information we have, I still see it quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the most important piece to highlight is the fact that he still has choice between the two. It's not like you're creating a humid enclosure that he's trapped in and he has no way to get away from the humidity. And I think that's what we can start incorporating more. And that's why I thought, it is a simple experiment to lay out. It's not very complicated. Like you said, if you notice stress, you could have pulled them out. And I think that's one, like I'm always looking for areas for keepers to engage in some behaviors that will allow them to not just run out and purchase another animal. Like, how can you find more interest in the animals that you have now? And I think running, little at-home type studies is a great way to do that. And anybody can do that with their animals. And of course, the caveat is make sure that it's a safe experiment. You're not doing something reckless, but something as simple as giving them different choices for different, basking areas or different levels of UV or different levels of humidity, all these different things. You can sit back and spend 6 weeks, 8 weeks watching the animal and learning about them, and then all of a sudden coming up with this, new level of care that you have. Now, when people come to you, you can say, I absolutely recommend having this level of humidity, at least in one section of the cage or in the enclosure. And you can do that with any species. It doesn't have to be leopard gecko. It can be whatever you keep at home. I think it's an important part of herpetoculture that not enough people engage in yet.
No, exactly. It's a hard line because, I don't want to, shout it from the rooftops and brag about it. But at the same time, I want to talk about it because it's such an easy thing to do. Yes, I've done a dissertation. So I have some knowledge of how to do an experiment, how to, be able to look at the data accurately and say, okay, yes, this is definitely a result. This isn't just a fluke. But anyone could have done what I've done. Anyone could go to the shop and get both those substrates and trial it. And if they didn't like it, change it. It's just, good that we have this platform now that we can talk about this on, because it gets it out there, and of course I'm happy to talk about it, and I'm happy to share what I found. But what's good about it is I'm not saying this is 100% the way to keep them. Mm-hmm. This is just the way that I've kept it. And but it works. And the results speak for themselves. It's not even, a case of, oh, I think it works because I've tried it. It's like, no, this, he's, to this day now, he's still in that enclosure and he's not lost any weight. He's not shown any stress behaviors. He's doing really well. So I don't think I'm even going to change it. I think I'm going to leave it as is. And I think I'm just going to encourage people to try it at least, even if they're not 100% sure about it yet. Definitely try it. Because the photos are proof it works. Mm-hmm. It does work. So
well, yeah, it forces you to be engaged with the animal more, because every day you might go, okay, I need to go see what they're doing or what they're up to. And again, it doesn't have to be a substrate humidity experiment. It could be the type of branches that you use for climbing, which ones do you like, where the placement of the bulbs, all the there's many different things that you could do, and it will force you to come in every day, take notes, watch their behavior. And I think sometimes as reptile keepers, we forget to enjoy our animals. We forget to come in and spend time with them and watch them move around. Instead, it becomes this, run into the room, feed, clean, water, and then leave. And for whatever reason, it's almost like we have to build a habit of going back into the room and engaging with the animals and just watching them behave. And giving yourself a reason to do that through running some sort of simple study or simple experiment is a perfect way to do that.
Yeah, exactly. A leopard gecko is a very common starter pet here in the UK, at least it is. So definitely, when you get to I'm guilty of it. When you get to 10 or 9 pets like I've got, you do forget about, the not simple, but, the plainer looking ones out of the group that you've got in terms of color and in terms of the rarity of them. For example, my Dune gecko is hardly anyone has them, but most people have a leopard gecko. So you do get a bit okay, been there, done that. But that's why, like you said, it's so important to make sure you're not forgetting that animal, even if, maybe, okay, you have for a while and then you go back to it and go, okay, well, I may have forgotten about it for a bit, but, now I'm going to do something. There's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. And, there's nothing wrong with admitting that, yeah, okay, sometimes the plainer ones get forgotten about because, it's a passion and you get passionate about these animals. So obviously if a rarer one comes on the market or one that you've never cared for before, but you really want, you are going to be a little bit more excited and aimed at that one. Doesn't mean you care for your other one less. It's just, human nature, I think, to an extent. So yeah, nothing wrong with that. As long as you go back and you try something new, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's why sometimes it's nice to just reset an enclosure. Okay, I have a crested gecko. How am I going to, do a better job, and then just tear it down and rebuild it just to get yourself like more engaged with that particular animal? Well, why don't we jump into the dune geckos, because that is a really interesting species. And why don't you tell me about how you discovered them? Was this just an animal that popped up for sale somewhere and you decided to grab, or was it something that you were looking for a while? Because they are a little bit more rare.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's one that I knew about because oddly enough, when I was back in secondary school, one of my friends actually had a colony of them, but I didn't know what they were. I saw them and was like, "Oh my god, these are amazing!" And he had about 5 of them. But he didn't call them dune geckos. He called them something completely, I think, jeweled lizards, which, when you do your research, it's just another name for the same animal. So I was aware of them, but obviously we fell out of, contact over the years, and I have no idea what happened to them. But I saw this one. So my little guy, he's a boy. I've only got the one, but he was for sale actually on, like you say, online. Someone just couldn't look after him anymore. So I saw him on there. However, I was aware of the species before, and I'd met the species in person before. So when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I've seen this animal before and I wanted it. And now I just was in a position that I could, take him on. So I contacted the seller and I said, by the way, where did you get him from? Because I never see him. I've not seen him in my local pet shops. I've not seen him in any pet shops where I've been on holiday. Sometimes I go in and I just have a look to see what stock's in there because, complete geek.
Mm-hmm.
But
we all do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just potential purchase. But no, they didn't have one either. So they said they bought him from a place up north of England, which is, I think, North Hampshire. But he couldn't tell me what garden centre exactly it was. But it goes to show you how hard. So I don't know if maybe that was a one-off import that they had imported. And then because he's so rare, that person snatched him up and then they've got bored of him after a year or two, because their reason for getting rid of him was that they were getting more snakes and they were switching to snakes rather than lizards in terms of their collection, which, each to your own. But I thought it was a little bit sad, for a reason to get rid of him. But took him on, and ever since I've fallen in love with the species, really. Like they're absolutely amazing, and I can't believe I've not seen one before.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about them is their size, because how big is he as a full grown?
Oh, he's absolutely tiny. He's 2 to 3 inches long, full grown.
Oh, wow,
so
that's it?
Yeah, absolutely tiny. So he'll sit happily in a 10-gallon tank for his whole life. So they're weenie. Yeah.
Well, and that's what I knew they were small. I didn't realize it was actually they were that small, almost like morning gecko size. And the thing that I like about that is they are small, and it's a good pet. Like you said, a 10-gallon is a big space for them. And even if you went to like a 20 or something, that would be a huge amount of room. And that's one of the things that I've been slowly tilting towards, and at least talking about, is trying to promote smaller species, just because of how much easier it is to provide a good, adequate level of care for them. Like if you want to provide a lot of space, start with a small species, then you don't have to have an entire room taken up with a dune. So can you tell me, in the wild, are they living in colonies? Like you said, your friend had a colony of 5. Were they all cohab together?
Yeah, so I believe he had 1 male and then 4 females. But I believe in the wild they're in colonies anyway. But I think the males are a little intolerant of younger males. So I think they chase them off after they get to reproductive age. And then they start forming their own little communities and so on. But again, the information is very sparse. So I didn't want to get more than 1 for now, because I wanted to make sure what I was doing was correct. But I'm pretty sure that they cohab fine as long as they've got enough hides and space. And I think because they are so small, even if you had a 20-gallon, that would probably be more than enough for 5 individuals. I think the tank that the 5 I saw in was 10, so wasn't huge, but even 10 for that, because they're so small, they didn't look cramped. They looked like they had enough space, and as long as you provide enough hides as well, and they can get away from each other, then that seems to be fine. And they bury a lot, so they do a lot of digging. So as long as they've got a deep enough substrate to bury in, they can avoid each other. Which seems to be thing.
Can you lay out a little bit of the basic care, or how are you caring for it? Because I know like you said, it's sparse information out there. So were you able to go off anything, or was it mostly just kind of intuition?
It pretty much was 90% intuition and 10% the literature. All I could find was basic care guides by online reptile shops and garden centers. And that was the only like thing I could find. And they were all very similar. They gave you, the temperature range, rough temperature range, but they all said different things. And they all gave you a rough substrate. So the substrate is the one thing just from their name that you can kind of infer, which is, sand, dune. So that was very easy. But yeah, in terms of their care, 10-gallon tank's fine. That, you don't really need to go bigger than that for one, because if you go too big, they can get a bit scared of the big space. I always forget the word for that. But, they don't like too much space, and they don't like open space. So you've got to make sure there's lots of hides in there and lots of cover. And then, you can put a water bowl in. I've got a water bowl in mine. And I top it up every day. And then I've got an underfloor heat mat for their heating. And that's on one half. But if you just sprayed down the cage once a week, they would drink the droplets off of all of the decor and the side of the glass. So, it depends on what you would prefer. But as long as obviously you're doing one of the two, they don't seem to mind. And then in terms of their diet, he gets fed about every 2 or 3 days, and he gets 3 or 4 small to medium locusts. And I'd say that's one of the hardest things was the food size, because he is tiny, his mouth is tiny. So it's really hard to get the right size food for him. And if I feed them, which you should, because, you should gut feed your insects, they grow within, the night. And then it's almost
overnight,
too big
they're like twice as big. You're like, damn it, you guys are huge now.
Yeah. So then I'm like, great, I can't feed you these, they've got to go to the leopard gecko or the crested gecko. So that's the hardest part. So I have to try to starve them a little bit, but make sure that, I literally cut probably a squares amount of lettuce off of a big lettuce leaf. And that way they get something, but they don't grow absolutely huge overnight. And that seems to do them okay. You can give them crickets as well. Only issue with crickets is what a lot of people have, which is if they stay in the tank, they can potentially bite him. And because he's so small, he's at more risk of that than, say, a crested gecko would be. So I try and avoid crickets. I give him that as a treat, and then he gets waxworms, and I cut mealworms for him as well, but he's not so keen on them. And because they've got that exoskeleton, again, I try and avoid that. So locusts and waxworms are the best for him because they're so soft. And then the others is a varied treat. And then obviously I put calcium powder on them every other day, so he gets supplements in that form as well. And that's the basic care. So that's like, if anybody wanted to start, that's what you could do. He hasn't got UV at the moment, but I plan to put that in at some point. And he's in a Exoterra 10-gallon cage. So it's got the mesh roof, so it wouldn't be that hard to do it. But to be honest, he's quite near a window, so he gets natural light anyway. And he's also right next to my day geckos, which have fully functioning Arcadia T5 bulbs. So I don't think, he's lacking UV as much as, you would think. But obviously, yeah, in future, that would be what I'd want to do. So I'd still say if you're going to get one, get UV, probably 4 to 5% for them. You could go 12 because they're a desert species, but because they're so small, 4 to 5% seems to be a bit kinder to them. And if you want plants in there, then obviously 12% can scorch them a little bit, can get a bit too hot. So it's really preference on that. They'd be fine with either. But I like to go 4 to 5 because it means I can put some cacti in there and make it just a bit more, natural for him as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as far as the sand goes, do you do anything to the sand to make it so he can burrow in it and create burrows, or are you patting it down or making it wetter? And like you said, you misted it down. Is that enough to make it so that he can dig through it? Because I'm just thinking really dry sand, like I would picture in a dune, doesn't really hold shape. Yeah. It just sort of like, it's like water almost. So is there a bit of both happening there, or what are you doing for that?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of does it himself in a way, because when he drinks from the water bowl, he splashes water, and that makes the sand wet. And when that happens, I've seen him dig under it, and then he just seals himself in there. So he does, but then I've seen him dig in, sandy sand as well. So he seems to be able to do both, but obviously, yeah, the wetter, the better. So when I spray it down, that helps with it quite well. I was debating about putting some soil in there to just hold the burrows up a bit more, but because he's got all his hides, he tends to dig a little hole in the hide, and then you end up with a mound of sand outside the entrance where he's already done it. So I'm kind of like, he seems okay, but that's something that I might probably look at in the future is maybe, getting more of a sandy soil mix as opposed to sand. But again, all of the information I gathered from where they come from, they're exclusively sand dunes. So I'm conscious not to make it too, soily or too wet, because obviously if sand dune is their natural habitat, then I shouldn't really stray from that. I should, go with what the natural ecology of the animal tells me.
If they're evolved to sit in loose sand dunes, then you want to stick with that. Are they from the Middle East as well, or are they an African species?
I think they're a bit of both. So I think they've been found in both, but I think they started in Africa and then have progressed to the Middle East. But I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty sure that Africa's where they started.
Like Northern Africa somewhere.
I believe so. But again, I think because there's not much on them, who really knows for sure, but I would say so. I mean, most things tend to come from Africa and spread out. So that's what I would assume without concrete knowledge. But they're adapted to both environments. If you look at them, they're real desert goers. They're perfectly happy in high temperatures. So his heat mat's on all day, and it's on a temperature of about 25 degrees C to 30 sometimes. And that's on one side, so he can get away from that. That's not the whole enclosure. And that seems to do him fine. Doesn't seem a problem with that. Equally, if it gets quite warm, I'll actually just completely turn that off, and he'll be fine at 20 degrees C room temp, ambient temp. And then obviously if it gets cold at night, then I'll turn it on. But yeah, he seems fine at about 20 degrees C. He'll still be up and about, even if there's no heat in there. So I think that goes to show you again, of a night when it gets cold in the desert, they probably do come out for a bit of food and obviously have a look around. So even though they're a desert species, I'd say be careful on your heat, because you don't want to cook them. You want to make sure that you're not making it too hot. And I think with them, you're more prone to doing that because they are so small and everything about them tells you desert and really high temps. So I'd say if you stick to your 20s and then no higher than about 30 degrees C, you'd be okay. But again, that's for one. If it's a group, I don't know if it maybe make it a bit different. It would depend on maybe if they're bullying each other off of the hot spots, you'd maybe have to mitigate that. But for him, at least 20 degrees C seems okay.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they are so small, so they could probably dehydrate really quickly. And that's always the interesting thing about desert species is they can kind of handle both extremes. But, you can't just take the temperature reading, and this sort of gets back to the leopard gecko too. You can't just take the temperature reading at noon when these animals will be burrowed deep away into a hide, into the bottom of the sand where it's going to be nice and cool. And then you don't need to replicate that desert heat in the day in your enclosure, because it will just become too hot, and the animals in the wild are not exposing themselves to that anyway. So you do want to be careful. And it is a really interesting species. Like I said, I like the fact that they're small, and I could see it'd be interesting to see those be a little bit more common in herpetoculture, especially if people can start, keeping some colonies. They might be a good candidate for cohabiting in that. And like I said, if you have since they are so small, it doesn't require a ton of space in your home.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like he takes up a tiny spot, and he's the smallest enclosure I've got. So, even the beetles have a bigger enclosure than he does.
Well, he's not much bigger than a beetle.
No, exactly. So, and the good thing about him as well is he's very active. So, he'll be out quite often. And where he is currently in my reptile room, he's right next to the day geckos, and they're also out in the day quite a lot. So, it's quite nice to have animals that are on show quite a lot. And obviously, overnight he does come out, but dusk and dawn is when he's at his prime. So it's quite nice because as the day geckos start to wind down and their lights go off, he's still up and about. So you've still got some animals on show. So, you get a lot out of them because you see them a lot, which is nice.
Yeah, so they really do make a great candidate for a pet. So why don't we slide over to the mountain dragon, or is it a horned mountain dragon or a green mountain dragon? Is that the exact same species?
So there's a few different species, but it's the family. So the family is mountain dragon, but there's like 3 or 4 different species or subspecies from what I could remember. So he's green mountain dragon is another common name for mountain dragon. Again, it's just another name that they give. But he's one of the smallest because I think there's a three or four, and there's one really big one, which a lot of people don't have but want, and then the rest are, I'd say, probably about the size of a cresty or a little bit bigger than a crested gecko. I think he is particularly small. I think he's meant to be bigger than he is. If I had to say, he's probably lengthwise as big as a cresty, but with a longer tail. And then widthwise, he's probably the same as a leopard gecko. So he is a little bit smaller than he should be. But he again was another purchase where I saw him online and I'd heard of the species, but I hadn't seen one for sale in any of the pet shops. And I just happened to have a free space in the reptile room, and I thought, well, if I could find something that's low key and doesn't require a lot of work, I could still care for that animal with my normal routine of work and life. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just saw him and was like, oh, this is amazing. I've never seen one of these guys for sale. I did again some research on what I could find, and that was even harder than the Dune gecko. I mean, there was hardly anything, I had to really just kind of look at. So they come from Asia, Southeast Asia, and they come from the tropical rainforest. So I had to kind of look at that as a starting point and be like, okay, so they like it humid, they like it, warm, they like water, because obviously it rains all the time in a rainforest, hence the name. So I had that to go on, and then I just gradually planted it. So again, I put a golden pothos in there, I put a parlor palm in there, and that's really seems to have taken off, and he really likes them. He'll sit under them quite a lot. And he already had a load of decor that came with him, and he already had all the heat he had. So he had I think he had a halogen bulb, and then he had a couple of UV T4 lights, which one on the top, one on the bottom. I don't know why the other one was to the side. That was just how he came. So I took that one out. He just came
from just a random person that was selling him, yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah,
literally. So I didn't want to be rude and be like, oh, what are you doing? So I just took him, and then as soon as I got him, I took that light off, because I thought that's a bit too much UV. And as soon as I did that, originally when I got him, he was glass surfing quite a lot. So, he was running up against the side of the glass. He was, just active. He was always running about. He also looked quite disheveled. So he was a bit thinner, and he also had a lot of stuck shed. That's number one thing I noticed, was he had a lot of stuck skin on his head, especially, and his tail and his arms. So I took that off, and straight away he calmed down. He didn't glass surf so much. So he had halogen bulb at top, and then T4 light to the right, and that was about 5% UVB, and that's it. So I just left it like that. Didn't change any of the decor or the soil, because I didn't want to stress him out too much than he already was. Left it a week, and then I thought, okay, he seems to have calmed down now. I'll look at the other bits. And I believe, if anyone wants to see it, it is on my Instagram channel. I did a complete enclosure revamp. So I took everything out. I put drainage layer in. So I put some hydroballs in the bottom. And then I put some, I believe it's called Cressy Life, and also koi fiber mixed together as the substrate. And then I put the live plants in. So I put golden pothos, parlor palm, and then all the logs he had, I just disinfected and then put back in. Once they'd been washed off, and just tried to keep the same layout he had, so it wasn't too different, but then at the same time create some more climbing perches for him and so on. And then since then, he's a different lizard. All of his stuck shed came off, so that's all gone now. He looks visually bigger. He looks like he's grown a little bit, and his behavior's changed. So rather than running around and glass surfing every day, which he did do when I first had him, he now sits on a log. He's got this favorite log that he likes to sit on. It's right under the parlor palm, and he'll either be awake just chilling out there, or he'll be asleep, and he'll eat and he'll drink, and he just looks a lot calmer. He's just a lot calmer lizard than he was. And I know, obviously, if you're not quite sure, you might think, oh, if he's not doing anything, he might be ill. But I think it's the other way around. I think, when he's chilled like that, I think that's how they're meant to be. I think when you look at it, he's in captivity. He's not in the wild. He's not having to hunt for his food as much, so he doesn't need to expend as much energy as he was. So I believe that's just a symptom of captivity. He doesn't need to be as active as he was. But I think, to me, glass surfing is definitely a stereotypical behavior. I always think of green Chinese dragons, where they always have that rubbed off snout quite often, and that's due to glass surfing. So that's kind of my opinion on it. I feel like I would rather see him just sitting around than running around like that. So yeah, he's a completely different animal, and I don't want to change his tank again. Like I've changed it and I'm happy with it. I might have to put some fresh plants in if the soil gets a bit, low on nutrients. I've just put a load of fresh vitamins, minerals back in again, which I'll be making a video of at some point on my channel for anyone who wants to like learn how to put your nutrients back into the soil. So yeah, pretty happy with it. But it was hard. Like there was no literature. I've just had to wing it really.
Well, it's, I see the horned mountain dragons. I shouldn't say often, but there are more common. And then I know you called it a green mountain dragon. I was like, well, I wonder if that's different. But then when you actually look at the lizard that you have and the horned mountain dragon, they do look slightly different. They look very similar, but there's less pronounced crests on the top of their head. Like yours has very smaller crests. And I actually didn't realize how small he is. It's so hard to tell in pictures. That's pretty interesting. And when I looked up green mountain dragon, basically nothing comes up. I'm guessing it's a subspecies under the same species of the horned mountain dragon. So I'll have to take a look at that. But getting back to the glass surfing, as a reptile keeper, that's like the worst thing you can see your animals do. And we've all had animals that have glass surfed, and when you see it happening, you just feel like, it just reminds you that you have them in a captivity, in an enclosure they're not happy in or not thriving in, and so you have to make a change. And sometimes it can take months to figure out what's causing that, right? You have to give them the enrichment, give them something that they want, that, like you said, it's just problem solving. But getting to the point where they stop doing that is such a relief. It just feels like finally you hit it properly and they're content in their enclosure.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes me, it makes me feel happy that I did take him on, because when I look at what he was like when I got him and what he's like now, again, it's so hard not to sound big-headed, because I'm not, you don't try to be, but, I can see the difference in him in a positive way. I'm sure that his old owners were, loved him and really wanted the best for him. But, he's just a different lizard now. And I think they didn't quite have it 100%. I think it was too dry. I think it was too dry for him. The stuck shed is a massive sign that it wasn't humid enough. So, and also I think that he quite likes the cover of the natural plants. So I think it was quite open, and I don't think he quite liked that. I feel like he wanted to feel like he could, sit behind a tree and you couldn't see him. And he's got attitude, like he'll let me hold him, but when I go to get him, he'll puff up and he'll hiss at me a little bit. But then once I've got him, he calms right down again. So that's also good to see, because it shows that he's displaying natural behaviors still. But then at the same time, he's not so stressed that he's like, oh, fear response. When I've actually got him, he's like, oh, okay, this is okay. But you do really see it. So it's one of the most extreme changes I've seen of all the animals I've had, but it's probably the most positive, because there's such a drastic change in him. Again, the only annoying thing is his Latin name. I can never pronounce his Latin name, but it's lepidogaster. Yeah, I think it is. It's Lepidgastor. And that always comes up as green mountain dragon, but I've heard people call them horned. So that's, I think, really doesn't help with the information when you're trying to find out what's best for them.
Because they definitely do look slightly different. So maybe there's an agamid expert that's in the comments somewhere that can illuminate it. But they don't look the same. They look similar, but there is a difference. And that's one of the things that I get annoyed about herpetoculture industry in general, is that animal surely was probably wild caught, went to a pet store, somebody bought it, and then you send this animal home where there's absolutely no information for care. And like you said, the person was probably doing what they thought was the best, but how would they know? Even you as a zookeeper who has experience keeping reptiles is going to struggle to get to the learning curve just to figure out what that animal needs. And the average person is not going to do that. So it's good that he's ended up in your care, but I do get annoyed when random wild caught animals get for sale to a random person that wants to get into reptiles for the first time. It just doesn't make sense.
No, and the more I think about it, and as you just mentioned, I think he probably was wild caught, because, as I say, I've never seen them anywhere, and because he is so small, I mean, part of me thinks that the species he is, and again, we need to look at his Latin name to be 100% sure, but I feel like they are slightly smaller than some of the other members of that agamid genus. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he's wild caught. Just his behavior, he doesn't seem like he's completely used to a captive setting. I feel like he's content at the moment, but it does, it's a shame because I would have bought him captive bred if I had the choice. I wouldn't have taken him from the wild. I hate doing that, but I've only seen one breeder, and that was on YouTube, and that was just a how-to video, and that wasn't his species either. That was the bigger, larger horned dragon or mountain dragon. So, I feel like if we want to keep him in captivity, just like your last video with the Euro guy, I always forget his name.
Phil. Yeah.
That's it, Phil. We need more guys like Phil, that are taking the time to do it properly. And then, if they can make a business out of it, great, because that has regulations and that has, it has to be done properly. So I feel like if we can encourage people to do it, then great. But yeah, it is a shame that we still take them from the wild, and it's a shame that it still happens. You think now in the day and age that we're in, it wouldn't happen, but it highlights to you that you have to be careful about, what place you buy your reptiles from in order to not promote that trade as much.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe one day you'll find a female. And has it actually been sexed? Are you sure it's a male, or you've just guessed?
I mean, I'm guessing. So to be honest, if someone could sex him, I would be quite interested in getting that done. But his behavior says male to me because he's shown a few territorial displays at me when I've walked past his cage. And he's also done it because my Cresty lives next door. And when my Cresty's out in the early evening and he's going to sleep, if he sees him, he'll do a little bit of a show. So he'll puff up and he'll just look bigger. So I feel like he might be a boy just on that. But again, without sexing, I'm not 100% sure. He was sold to me as a male, but, knowing what I know, I'm not 100% sure they were aware he was a male. I reckon where they've bought him from is just slapped a label on and gone, just that'll do. Yeah, just guessed.
Well, maybe one day you'll come across the opposite sex and you can start a little breeding project yourself and have some captive bred ones. Why don't we jump into the beetle colonies? Because you have some pretty interesting beetles, and I don't see the fruit beetles and the jewel beetles in Canada at all. Maybe in the States there are, but tell me how you got into keeping these inverts, and I guess, do you use them as feeders as well? Is that how you originally got into them?
Yeah, so originally, it was way back when I was, probably 12, 13. Before I even got Nero, I had a colony of them. I just saw them in the pet shop in passing and thought they were really neat. And I just had them in a little 10-gallon aquarium. And they only lived a couple months because I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just thought they were really neat. And then since then, I didn't see them for years. And then I went to a bug show that happens in the UK every year around October. It's Entomological Society. It's AGS, I believe. And it happens every year at Kempton Racetrack. And they were there for sale again. And so were the jeweled, so the purple beetles. And I just was couldn't believe, that I'd seen them again. I'd only gone there anyway as a friend of mine who is more invert based and prefers his insects as reptiles wanted someone to go with. And I just thought, well, it sounds like it'd be quite a cool show. So I just went anyway. And it was just like a reptile expo, loads of inverts for sale, spiders, scorpions. And there they were next to some millipedes. And they were only, I think, £3. They were nothing. And the guy was just trying to get rid of them. He said he had them for years. They're bred really well, but he just didn't want them anymore. So I was like, tell me everything. And he told me a bit about them. And then I just took them home. And then I've just had them ever since, on and off. But now I've really started breeding them properly because I want them as feeder insects because I'm trying to save money. But also when they're adults, they're absolutely beautiful. And if you set them up right, they breed all the time. So you'll always have a consistent, adult and larvae stage. So as long as you don't feed out too many, you always have a self-sustaining colony.
Do you pretty much only use the larvae for a feeder? Because the adult looks fairly large. Yeah,
the adult, you could feed, but I worry about it getting stuck in their throats because they're very wide. They're quite a chunky beetle. They can also secrete a little bit of a foul-smelling substance if you pick them up. So I worry about that. And also the hard casing of the wings, because they can fly. I just worry that might get stuck in their digestion. So I stick to the larvae because they're just soft-bodied creatures. They do have a little bit of a nasty set of mandibles on them, so you do have to be careful with that. But when they're, small, they're about the size of the Dune gecko, so that they're not huge and they can't do much damage. So I stick to them really. And yeah, they're really cool. So I have 2 colonies of them. I have the jeweled ones, which are the purple ones, which are a different species. They're all fruit beetles, but they're all, again, in their own family within that family. So the yellow ones are the sun-spotted. So they come from Tanzania and Africa all the way through the south, I believe, and Tanzania. And then the scarab beetles or the purple beetles, again, same beetle but different names. They come from north and, again, Tanzania, and they feed on fruit. So, rotting fruit that falls from trees, they'll feed on that. The larvae will eat leaf litter and they'll eat dead wood. So they kind of clean up, they're like the forest cleanup crew. And they're just really pretty. So that's what drew me to them, was their colors. And then, after keeping them and realizing that they were breeding, I just thought, well, it saves me money and I don't have too many animals then. So it became, just a secondary thing out of just keeping them as pets. The feeding them out just became a cost-effective way to keep animals down, but then at the same time, enrich my own animals diet-wise. Because they're full of protein, those bugs.
Well, I am not a huge invert person. I'm still trying to get there. They still kind of creep me out. but the purple jewel beetles, and even the yellow ones too, but the purple ones particularly are amazing looking. They're so beautiful. Like the colors, it almost kind of looks like, for any of those who are listening, almost like oil in water. So it has that deep purple shimmer, and they are incredible. When you have them in these colonies, do they overpopulate themselves, or are you picking out the larvae quick enough to make sure that doesn't happen?
I try my best to, but they have moments where they just, because the eggs are tiny, you can't see the eggs. They're smaller than your fingernail. So with the naked eye, you can only see the grubs when they get to a decent size. So, when they do all hatch, you can end up with like 10 to 20 grubs all of a sudden. And the other day you would have none. But that's just because they grow so fast. And again, as long as you've got a nice deep leaf litter system in there, oak and beech they love. If you just have a load of that leaf litter substrate, they'll just burrow into that, and then you'll only see them when they start getting big. But the good thing about them is before they turn into a beetle, they actually cocoon. So they make a little cocoon out of mud and spit, which they seal themselves into. And then that's where they metamorphosize and turn into a beetle, and then they hatch out as the beetle. So what I tend to do is I wait till I start seeing those cocoons. I pick all the cocoons out, and then I put them in literally just one of the feeder insect boxes. I just clean it out, and then I put some more air holes in, and I just put them in that. Bit of paper towel for humidity. And then when they hatch out, I just put them into the main colony. Let them reproduce, and then start the cycle up again. And in that way, I can keep an eye on them. And if there's lots of cocoons, then I know that there's probably not many, grubs. And then if I see a lot of grubs but not many cocoons, I know that's probably the time to start feeding some of them out and then leave some. But like you say, their color's absolutely amazing. I mean, their name is purple jeweled because they look like a jewel. And I can, when you see them for the first time, if you've never seen them, it really takes you away, like just how beautiful an insect can be. And they're not huge. They're about the size of your fingernail if you had to pick them up, but they can fly. So you do have to just be careful of that when you're opening up the tank and stuff. And their sole purpose when they're a beetle is to breed. So you can feed them. I feed them cucumber and banana carp in a bowl, and they will eat that. So I would say that you do need to feed them. And that, they'll last probably about 6 or 7 months, and then they'll die, and then they'll be like, that's it. But they lay loads of eggs. So as long as you've got a breeding pair, they normally, will pretty much self-sustain. But they like heat, so you've got to make sure that it's warm. Again, a heat mat works fine under the tank. And again, if your ambient room temp is like 20 degrees C, they'll be okay on that. But they appreciate the extra heat. And one thing that's not essential per se for them is you can put a UV light in there. but it's not essential. But the good thing about that is you really see those colors in the light. They shimmer. They literally shimmer. Even with the purple ones, I've also got some green scarab beetles, which are the same type, but just a slightly different color. And again, under the light, they look absolutely amazing. So, if you want them for display, I would say put UV in there just so that you can see them. But they do appreciate it. They're very active when the UV's on. They'll fly about the tank. So in terms of their housing, you still probably want a 10-gallon tall exoterra. You wouldn't want a short, stocky little box, because when they do fly, they do actually climb quite a lot as well. So you want some climbing logs in there so that they can get up above the substrate. And I think that might be because when the larvae are in there, they can be a bit nippy. So it's the adult's way of getting away from them. If you want to, you can separate the larvae from the adults once you see them. Only problem I found with that is you end up with like 10 or 12 tanks of just grubs and beetles, and it becomes a bit messy. So I tend to leave them in there, and then I just provide lots of climbing opportunities for the adults. But because the larvae mainly eat leaf litter, they don't really bother them. They would only nip them to get them out of the way. They're not trying to predate on them, so you don't have to worry as much on that one.
Well, I think that this is a concept that I'm just thinking of now. As people that keep lizards, we all have feeder insects. We have these tubs of, either roaches or crickets, and they can usually get pretty gross, and it's not very appetizing or even, nice to look at. But it would be cool to incorporate, having display enclosures with feeder insects, because it sort of hits both terms, or both worlds. You have a display enclosure that people can come in and look at and be fascinated by these beetles, but then they simultaneously act as feeders, plus the added enrichment for the beetle itself. Like, the beetles are going to be healthier, the grubs are going to be healthier, especially if you're providing them a good spectrum of light and different abilities to dig and climb. I mean, I don't want to sound like PETA or anything like that, like animal rights groups, but we're giving the insects a better life as well, which is an added bonus. And I don't think, it's not like the beetle larvae can be your staple forever, but it can be one of them, like you said, as adding variety into your animal's diet. That is one easy way to do that without having the creepy container of crickets in the corner that smells and all this. You have an actual, another display enclosure. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, exactly. I just think they are just their own exhibit because of the colors, and especially when the colony starts taking off and you end up with 8 or 9 adults in one go, they look absolutely amazing. So yeah, they really do make their own exhibit. I would say that if I want to try and up it a bit more, I really want to put the spotted sun beetles, which are the yellow and black ones, I want to put them in an actual reptile enclosure because they will look amazing in there. Only problem with that is I'm pretty sure all of my lizards would have a go at trying to eat them if they saw them. And as I say, I would feed them the larvae, but I wouldn't feed them the adult bugs because I think they're too hard for their digestion. The purple ones are smaller, so maybe they would be able to eat them. But again, you don't really want them eating the adults because they're the breeding stock. They're the thing, they're going to create more bugs. So maybe in the future, if I can look at getting a snake, I would maybe try and put some in there. I know that Liam has his millipedes in with his king snake. Mm-hmm. That's, that to me is amazing. That's really cool. So I would like to do that. But with the species I've got at the moment, I don't think any of them would leave them alone. Even my leopard gecko would have a go at them. Like, he would probably realize he couldn't eat them, but even if he has a go at them and he gets stuck, he could potentially choke. So yeah, it's just not worth the risk.
Yeah, it is interesting because sometimes I have super beetles that end up pupating, and then you see them running around the enclosure, and they're pretty elusive. You don't see them very much in both my crested gecko and my day gecko enclosure because they're very nocturnal, those beetles, so you don't see them unless it's nighttime. And when I had redone my day gecko enclosure not that long ago, I found many superworm beetles. I guess they're darkling beetles, and that she hadn't touched, and So I don't know if she didn't see them or if she's just not interested in them. Like, they do smell really bad. Like, I had killed a couple of them because I didn't want them to be in there. And I was amazed at the smell. Like, it's a very strange smell. It almost smells like chemicals, like rubber burning almost. It's very weird. And so I imagine that the other beetles might do the same thing. So maybe the lizards would, leave them alone, but who knows? Like you said, it might not be worth the risk.
No, exactly, because then you just end up with a load of dead ones, and it's just not fun. It's
Yeah,
not fun, and
exactly.
it rocks your confidence as to what you wanna do next. But I mean, at the same time, I think it's good to challenge those rules and make sure that you learn that just because it's been a rule doesn't mean it can't be broken. For example, the leopard gecko and heat rocks. You know, there's so many articles about don't ever put heat rock in with your leopard geckos; they'll burn. You know, and my leopard gecko, he's had a heat rock in there, and he still does in his enclosure for years, and he's never burnt himself, not once. And I have used it when I first got him. He didn't have a heat mat; he had a heat rock, and he never burnt himself. So, you know, I feel like you got to make sure that sometimes these are isolated cases, and it's not a staple rule. So you do have to challenge that and make sure you are. Even now, I leave the heat rock in there on the humid side, but I'll only turn it on if it's really cold. The heat mat does a good enough job, so I don't have to worry. But there has been occasions, like the winter just gone, where it was just raining constantly, and it brought humidity too high, brought it to about 70 in there. So I had to just have extra heat in there, and it was the only thing I had extra heat wise that would dry it out that I could quickly plug in, and it did the job. But obviously, if someone saw that, they'd be like, "Oh, you've got a heat rock. You know, that's really bad." And that's where I think you have to be like, "Well, maybe in this instance it would be, but hang on a minute. This is how I've done it, and I've not had a problem." As I say, he's 15 this year, and he's never been burnt once. So, you know, I feel like
It comes down to how you engage with the process and making sure that you're keeping up with your care and paying attention. That's pretty much it.
Yeah,
Like you said,
exactly.
there's nuance to all the rules. Well, why don't we wrap up with your role at the zoo, because I want to talk about that for sure. And last time we talked to you, you were working with we talked about the tortoise exhibit, a tortoise enclosure that you had rebuilt. I think that was sulcatas, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
leopards. So
and leopard
sulcata
tortoises,
and leopards. Yeah, so they're a mixed exhibit.
Yeah, so it was a really cool conversation where we talked about how you were able to take this exhibit and change it to make it much better. But now you're actually working with completely different species. So why don't you just list off what you're working with now?
Yeah, so I'm not working with reptiles at all now. So all my reptiles are my own. So I've just moved zoos to another zoo in my local area, and I'm on the Hoofstock team. So pretty much anything with a hoof, but particularly white rhino, giraffe. So we got Nubian giraffe, scimitar horned oryx, which were until recently extinct in the wild. So that was a really cool one to work with. Blesbok, Grevy's zebra, lesser eland, and longhorn cattle, ostrich. And then we've also got some more antelope. So dik, so, tiny little antelope from Africa. And then we've got what we call honorary Hoofstock. So we've got skunks and raccoons on our section. So they're not Hoofstock, but they're on our section. So yeah, completely different. Gone mammals, basically.
But I'm sure there's so much you can learn just caring for mammals that you can transfer over into reptile care as well. But so it seems like it's mostly African species, but those are some big animals you're working with. Like rhinos, I can't imagine. Yeah. I've never seen a rhino in person. It's one of those things where you see a picture of it or you see it on TV, but it probably doesn't do it justice when you see them in person. And giraffes too, probably. You're just like, you can't imagine how big they are.
Yeah, no, that's the first thing that I thought when I started the job. I started the job in end of July. No, start of July. Sorry, no, June. End of June, beginning of June, and then I've been there ever since. And that literally was the first. I mean, I was lucky in most zoos you go to, when you're working with dangerous animals like rhino, you won't work with them straight away. You'll probably work with something a little less dangerous on that section. And then, you'll be supervised and then you'll work with them. And then the end goal would be that you would work with them on your own, unsupervised. But I was lucky in the fact that as soon as I got to this new zoo, I started on rhinos. So I was straight in with the dangerous stuff, supervised obviously, and then as obviously I've been there longer and I've passed all the safety checks, I'm left on my own. But it's I'm still learning. I'm still getting signed off on it because they are big dangerous animals. But I like that because it shows that you get professionally trained and that you're not just left to it. but they're huge. The TV really doesn't do it justice at all. And it's a privilege to get that close to one, let alone work with them. And I work with 3. So yeah.
When you work with them, what are you in the enclosure, or are you behind barriers at all times, or what sort of fashion are you working with these animals?
So this is protected contact. So you're always behind a barrier. You never go in with them, just for obvious reasons. Obviously, at the old zoo I was at, I was free contact. So I would go in with the camels and the nilgai, which are an Asian antelope species. I would go in with them, and that wouldn't be a problem. In hindsight, it's still dangerous. It still probably isn't the safest way to do it, but it's just the way it's done. And that's how zoos go. You either go free contact or protected. But comparing the two, I think I prefer the protected, because you can still get up close to them and have that interaction that most people don't get to do, but you're just in a much safer position.
You can be more relaxed.
Yeah, you can be more relaxed. You still got to be on the ball. You still can't let your guard down, because that's when you will get hurt is when you don't keep on the ball. But it's obviously much safer to be next to one with a steel fence in between you than in the enclosure with nothing.
So how does it work? Is it just like a panel of fencing that you can go in? I'm sure you're not moving this panel around, right? Or how does that work? Like, how do you stay protected?
Yeah. So essentially, you've got these massive steel bars which are horizontal, so that you can stick your hand through, but obviously you couldn't physically walk through. And the idea with that is you can touch them or get close to them, but you're less likely to get your hand trapped or anything like that. We also just have a rule to keep your hand straight when you touch them. And the only reason we touch them is to do things like medications or checking their feet. So it's all to do with training. So it's just to make it easier for training. And then that goes right away from the rhino house to the paddock. So that's just generally standard for big animals like that. You'll have steel enclosures with horizontal bars, and all the gates will be operated from the outside. So you don't have to go in to operate the gates either. You can do it all from the hallway, so to speak.
So what are the rhinos like as far as their temperament? Are they pretty relaxed? Do they recognize you? Do they come over when they see the keepers, or how is it working with them and interacting with them on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean they do. Obviously, I'm quite new still, so they haven't quite sussed yet that I'm part of the team now. But they have on occasion come over, and they'll let you give them a scratch through the bars. So they like that, but they don't like too much more than that. If they have enough, they'll just walk away. So they're more docile than their reputation makes them out to be, but you still have to just be careful because they are category 1 dangerous animal.
Yeah, like you said, they're massive. And what about the giraffe? I know that I think you even this morning you were posting a picture or an Instagram video there was a giraffe, and maybe even a baby.
Yeah.
I forget. What is it like working with them?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, he's a 2-year-old, so he's small. He's only a baby, and that's amazing. I mean, I always liken it to the moment in Jurassic Park where Dr. Grant says they move in herds, and you have that music by John Williams playing. That's it, really. That's the best way I can describe it. That's the feeling you get when you go in and you get that close to them. And again, you realize how small you are compared to them. Like I'm about 5 foot something, and that doesn't even go above their knee. That's about head height with their knees. So,
how tall is a full-grown giraffe?
Oh, I mean, I don't know the exact quote for that or figure for that, but I mean, they're tall. I mean, they could probably be the same height as halfway up like a big conifer tree, something like that. They're tall. Yeah. I mean, we have like a double layer system so that when we need to get close to their heads, we have to basically go upstairs to a different platform level to get level with them.
It's amazing.
So gives you an idea. Roughly, they're big. Yeah, they're tall.
And what was the species that you said that was extinct or was recently extinct? Was that I forget what it was. Yeah, so that's the scimitar horned oryx, and they are that's it. So they are big.
antelope, which would be most well known for their horns. They've got very spindly long horns. Most people have seen the Arabian, which is grey and black, and that comes from Arabia. But these guys come from North Africa, or did, and Chad, and like Middle East. Unfortunately, they were hunted out to extinction, I think, somewhere in the 1960s, 70s. And then they've been bred in zoos ever since. And I think they got very low. I think they were in the, numbers down to less than 100 when they were in zoos. So they've bred them up ever since. And they've only recently, in the last couple of years, just started reintroducing them to their former areas. So where they were naturally occurring, they've put them in protected areas within that. And then they're monitoring them and they're letting them breed. And I think definitely in Chad, there's a herd. And I think there's about 600 now. So
Wow.
they're doing well where they've been reintroduced. So that was really cool when I learned that fact. And when I learned that we had them at the zoo, that was a real privilege, because they're a conservation success story, basically. So they're a good one to draw on.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, one of the good reasons for zoos to stick around and to work on captive breeding and whatnot. That's pretty cool. And then what about you said you have raccoons and skunks as well, which are not Hoofstock, but you said they're honorary Hoofstock. So what do you do with them? What type of work do you do with them on a daily basis?
So obviously feed and clean, which is the same for all. But we also have talks. So we'll go in and do a talk with them, and we'll do some training amongst that. And then we also have experiences. So we actually do skunk walks, where we take the skunks on a walk around the zoo, and public can book that and do that. And so obviously we go and get them, bring them out, put the harness on and take them for a walk. That normally lasts about half an hour, and then we take them back in. So we use them for, guest experiences mainly, but they're also just a cool addition. If you see them going past in the zoo, it's just another cool animal to have in the exhibit. And the skunks and the raccoons are next door to each other. And the raccoons can go into the skunks enclosure because they have a climbing frame area, but skunks can't go into the raccoons. So you get a nice mixed exhibit feel, but at the same time, they have their space and they can get away from each other as well.
And so will they not antagonize each other if they're sort of in the same space, or do they not necessarily see each other?
Skunks especially have really bad vision, so they don't tend to see them until they're right up close. And normally the raccoons don't get that close because they know that the skunks can spray. Because you'd find them naturally, in North and South America, and in Canada, I'm sure there's raccoons.
Oh yeah, they're all over the place.
Yeah. So they would naturally occur anyway. But the skunks' markings are a big sign to say, "Don't come near me because I can." Yeah. So that they avoid each other.
Will the skunks ever mark in the exhibit? Will they do that?
Not really. They tend to save their smell for like when they need it. They'll only do it as a last resort. If they feel like their life's on the line, then they might spray. Mm-hmm. But they actually stomp. So they'll put their front feet forward and they'll put their tail up, but it won't be facing you. And they'll stomp towards you, and they'll just fluff up and make themselves look big to say like, if you come any closer, then I can. So that they try to do everything they can to not spray. They try and warn you first, basically. And we've never been sprayed, so we've been all right. Yeah,
thank God for that, because it's quite a smell. Honestly, when you see when a skunk sprays, it is a serious it lingers for a long time. And both species are very intelligent, as far as I can tell. And both skunks aren't as big of an issue, but especially here, raccoons are a big issue getting into things. They just a couple weeks ago, my dad had 2 chickens get killed, or maybe it was even more, by raccoons, and they basically have hands, and they rip apart the wood shed. They just get into everything, and they're also very wasteful eaters, I find. Like, they'll kill a chicken, they'll eat like a piece of it, and then leave the rest of the body, but they are incredibly sneaky and very good problem solvers, it seems like.
No, they are. I mean, as I say, we train them, so they are capable of cognitive thought and reasoning. We just do simple station training, so we just teach them to go to a tree stump on command and stay still, and then stand on their back legs and receive a treat. So they are smart. I would say that they understand what you want them to do. Mm-hmm. You've just got to make sure that you do a signal or some kind of movement so that they know that means this behavior, because obviously they can't understand what we're saying. So you have to rely on signals, which they do pick up. If they can figure out that signal means this, then they'll do it. So yeah, we that's what's great about working with them as well, is they're very like trainable. So they're very tactile and they're very adaptable. So what's nice when I do the talk about them is I can say that, raccoons aren't endangered for a change. They aren't endangered. Their numbers are fine. And actually they're a bit of a pest, they're everywhere. So it's nice from a keeper point of view to talk about something that's not in decline or, its numbers are dropping, which makes a change.
Yeah. They're one species that just completely thrives in an urban environment. Like their little hands, they can just take garbage can lids off of. They get like, if in the city I live in, if you walk through the city at 2 a.m, you will see hundreds of raccoons if you want to look for them. Like they're there. They travel in packs. They're all over the place, and they just, I don't know where they go during the day, but they just thrive inside a city.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's because they are so adaptable, like you say, they know that a trash can might have food in it, and they're omnivorous. So they eat both animal and plant matter. They don't just eat one or the other. So again, that gives them an edge. If there's less meat around, they can eat veg. And if there's less veg around, they can eat meat. And obviously in a city, there's tons of both. And I think, UK, we have foxes are pretty much the same as raccoons. Like, the red fox is our equivalent. They are everywhere. Driving home from work yesterday, I saw 4 just crossing the road. And even at the zoo working, once I'd locked up the paddock, 2 jumped out the bushes into the paddock and just had a look round. So, it's the same thing. But then again, for me anyway, it's nice to have wildlife doing well. And knowing that you're sharing, your space with something, because we don't really have any, we don't have wolves or bears in the UK anymore. They all got hunted out years ago, centuries ago even. So the fox is the nearest thing that we have to a big, wildlife mammal that you can compare to. And I think working with raccoons, I would find them really interesting to see them in the wild, knowing what they're like in captivity. It'd be cool to see the difference. But again, you have to incorporate in your talk that, you can understand why they're seen as pests because they do so well. But at the same time, you got to be careful not to try and demean them in that way, because they are still a living creature that has a right to be there.
Exactly.
But,
yeah.
You have to cover that human animal conflict, because I can imagine when they're in their, hundreds, they do cause a bit of damage in an area.
Yeah, they certainly can. But yeah, that's a good point to make, is you don't want to vilify them and make people think like, oh, raccoons are bad and there's tons of them, we should just kill them all. They're just thriving in the environment that we created. And yeah, I always hear about in the UK, there's always a yearning for more mammals, especially larger mammals. And I actually just last weekend, I came very close to seeing not very close to seeing a bear. I saw a bear that was very close to me. It was just he and I were walking down the same path, and it was just, it's one of those cool scenarios where you come very close to being face to face with it, and it's nice to be in a part of the world where that can happen. And I can see why in the UK it's, even seeing a fox is probably nice, because it sort of reminds you that there is still some wildlife out there.
Yeah. Badgers as well are another one that, as soon as I see one of them, I'm like, wow. And they have been persecuted massively over the last few years, mainly due to TB outbreaks in cattle. They attributed that to them. So they culled a load of them to try and stop the spread of that. But that actually made it worse, because they're social. And if you kill most of their group, they just wander off looking for more badgers, which just spreads it even more. So, it's nice to, have them and, still know that there's wildlife out there, because we hear so much now that everything's declining or it's extinct or it needs help. So, I think it's nice to have that one or two success stories, and it can hopefully encourage us to look after some of the stuff that isn't so adaptable and makes you appreciate them a bit more, when you have a species that can adapt and can survive.
Yeah, no, exactly. I completely agree. Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything we wanted to today. Is there anything that you wanted to mention before we wrap up? Did we miss any points that you wanted to make?
No, I think we've covered a lot of good points, really, to be honest. I think, I don't really have any more to add, other than I think just if we take anything from this episode, it would be, remember to keep pushing the boundaries of your care. Don't just think that that's it, I've done enough. Make sure that you're always looking at ways to improve. don't be too quick to judge people's ideas. Just because you may not agree with it doesn't mean it's wrong. I've seen recently anyway, a few of the bickering online, and just a bit more bickering on reptile forums than I have seen previously. So, I think we just all got to remember that we're all here to help each other. And, you don't have to be rude. It's a choice, just be polite. You may not agree with it, but do it in the right way, and then we'll all benefit.
Exactly. I think that's really well said. Innovation comes from people doing things differently, not from people doing things exactly the same. And if we want to be an innovative group, we have to allow for people to experiment. And I think doing what you did with your leopard gecko is a great example of how people can experiment with their own animals at home in a safe setting, and you'll allow yourself to learn more about the animals that you keep, and then you can bring that to the hobby as well. So, Olly, thank you so much for sharing all the stories. It was fantastic. Can you let everybody know where they can find more information about yourself online?
Yeah, of course. So I'm on Instagram at the moment as Infinite Reptile, so infinite_reptile. You can go to my normal Instagram page, which is Olly Wilson Photos, and there's a link to the Infinite Reptile page there. And that is, all the photos and videos of my collection. So, I've pretty much filmed all of the revamps I do. And it's just a page for advice and tips. Again, it's just how I do it. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but hopefully, if you want some inspiration and you just want some basic advice, I know obviously the online forms can be a bit confusing. So, go to there and have a look. I probably will be back on YouTube at some point. At the moment, I won't be, because I can't do both with work and Instagram. It's too much. So for the moment, go to Instagram. You'll find me on there. And obviously, if anybody has any questions, feel free to DM me and I will get back to you, with whatever I can when I can.
Yeah, and on Instagram you do have, it's probably worth saying that some of the videos you have are like long form videos. They're not just short little reel things. You have proper videos on there on the sort of the IGTV side of things. So if anyone's interested in getting more content that way, they can go there. And of course, that is all in the show notes. And thank you very much, Olly. This was a fantastic conversation. So thanks for jumping on another episode.
Yeah, no, again, thanks for having me on, and I look forward to many more discussions.
All right, that is the end of that one. Olly, thank you so much for joining me on another episode. I think you really got my mind spinning on this one, especially with the feeder insects. I'm thinking of how can I find a species of feeder insects that I can actually turn into somewhat of a display enclosure that simultaneously looks cool, but then also acts as feeders for the geckos. So that was a really interesting topic. And I also love the concept of doing at-home studies. Again, I'll say the word safe, at-home safe studies with the animals to help people stay engaged with their animals, help them learn the behaviors a little bit on a deeper level. And if you're a listener, remember, we're still at the beginning phases of learning what there is to know about reptiles. We'll never know everything. So you can actually discover something that many people don't know or many people aren't aware of. So set up some studies, set up some preferential studies, figure out what the animals want, what type of lighting, what type of perches they use, what type of substrates they like. There's a giant list of things that you can do, and I think that would all help us A, move herpetoculture forward, and B, help you stay engaged with the animals that you have right now, rather than, just to sort of help fight that urge of wanting to run out to the reptile show and buy a new animal to get that excitement again. Maybe you can transition that want for excitement into one of the animals that you already have and help add to the knowledge base of herpetoculture as we know it. I think that is a much better use of your time and energy. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, make sure you share it on social media. Instagram or Facebook is always the best way to do that. If you're looking for more information on the podcast, head to animalsathomenetwork.com. There you'll find all the show notes for the episodes. Thank you very much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And if you would like to join us on Patreon, that way you can message me back and forth relatively easy, or join us on one of the Zoom chats and also have early access to episodes, head to patreon.com/animalsathome. I will see you guys next week.